Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching TopTenzNet, and in the video today we're looking at the top 10 things you probably didn't know about Vincent Van Gogh. Okay, just before we get started on this one, I know that Americans out there will say that I'm pronouncing it wrong. Should be Vincent Van Gogh, but in Britain we say Vincent Van Gogh, so I'm gonna roll with that in this video. As always, have a go at me in the comments if you want. Despite living a life that was in many ways more modest than most of ours, Van Gogh, the painter, has become a larger-than-life figure. His paintings have sold for such high prices, and stories like the removal of one of his ears have completely overshadowed the real person and the true nature of his body of work. Obviously, no one can completely convey the entirety of a human being, but it will address a few of the common misconceptions and expand our knowledge of the man and his work. Number 10. Massive body of work. How many of Van Gogh's paintings has the layperson seen? Probably they've seen Starry Night, a sunflower painting or two, and a few self-portraits. Certainly they haven't seen enough to get the impression that Van Gogh actually left behind a body of 870 paintings. On top of that, there were more than 1,100 drawings, something he often did on days when it was too windy for paint or there just wasn't the money for a canvas handy. Unlike most artists who would do a sketch as a rough draft for a painting, Van Gogh would usually do a drawing as a second attempt at a particular piece of art, as if the idea of an image were more important to him than the composition of the piece. It was such a prolific output that for a 2-month period, he was doing a painting a day. Number 9. Very late bloomer. Most visual artists find their passion fairly early in their childhood. You learn they would often almost compulsively draw or paint so that they could have a style by the time they were 18. Van Gogh was, by contrast, 27 when he decided to become an artist, curiously after he had already failed in a career as an art dealer. What's more, although he did take drawing classes, he didn't bother with formal painting education, deciding instead to study other artists' technique. Considering that he passed away at the age of only 37, that means he was creating 87 paintings a year. That would be prolific even for today, with all the digital equipment that's available to simplify and cheapen the process. Art historians say that this is one thing that held him back from greater recognition during his lifetime, as he was only acclaimed shortly after his passing. There just wasn't enough time for word of mouth and prestige to build up during his truncated career. Number 8. As a teacher. At the age of 23, Van Gogh took an unpaid, except for lodging, job as a teacher at William Stokes's boarding school in Ramsgate in the UK. There were only 24 students in the school whose ages ranged from 10 to 14 years, which Van Gogh admitted in a letter to his parents wasn't many. He still found it frustrating how hard it was to drill the lessons into the children's heads instead of just parrot them to the kids. He was also angered when he saw William Stokes send kids to bed without any dinner or tea, even though they seemed generally well behaved. During this period, he developed a love of the beach that compelled him to take his students there even during severe storms. Whatever his feelings about the experience, Van Gogh was let go from the position after only 2 months. Number 7. Puritans going to church. During his stay in the UK, which began in 1873, Vincent saw a painting which was to become not only his favourite, but one which art historians believe shaped much of the rest of his life. It was a George Henry Borton painting from 1867, originally entitled The Early Puritans of New England Going to Church. To Vincent, it wasn't just an artistic experience to see, but a religious one. To him, it was an experience which connected art, which spoke to the common people, with the spirit in a particularly moving way. It was no coincidence then that it was after the end of his career as an artist that he decided to become a painter. Speaking of which, number 6. Fired from the clergy for excessive zeal. In his final attempt at a regular career before the one which would immortalize him, Van Gogh worked as a preacher for coal miners in Borinage, Belgium, after also dabbling in it while in the UK. This was hardly surprising, as this had been his father's profession before him. Surviving accounts of his sermons begin with the phrase, "Our life is a pilgrim's progress." Characteristically, he apparently got far too into the career despite the fairly squalid conditions. He was noted to be extremely kind and dutiful, but not very good at speaking eloquently. After 18 months, his excessive zeal was cited as a reason for not renewing his contract, along with problems organizing services. Number 5. Brothel Regular. Despite his seemingly pious outlook, Vincent Van Gogh wasn't just someone who sneaked off to the brothels. He actually wrote about his habits to his brother Theo, among others, sometimes using profane language. He had a system where he believed that it was optimal to visit the brothel once every 15 days, when Theo sent him enough money in order to maintain his physical vigor, but more than that would soften the mind and lower the quality of his work. Of course, linking sexual activity with diminishing the mental faculties wasn't so much out of step with the times. Still, Van Gogh's specific time system seemed pretty unusual even in context. Not that it prevented him from catching various diseases such as gonorrhea, which at one point put him in the hospital for 3 weeks. Number 4. Issues with Impressionism. All the most famous and expensive Van Gogh paintings come from the period after he'd been to Paris in 1886 and been supposedly influenced by the Impressionist movement. However, it was not as if this visit was a sudden revelation to a naive artist and it instantly won him over. Even in 1884, when he was up in the Netherlands painting dark and moody peasant pieces like his 1885 masterpiece, The Potato Eaters, his brother Theo was writing him letters that implied he thought of Vincent's work as being influenced by the Impressionists. In writing, Van Gogh had issues with the association, saying that he didn't know what it meant, hadn't seen any of it, and didn't feel the need to see it. It just goes to show how good it can be for us to embrace new things. Number 3. Actually, he might not have cut his ear off. Recent historical investigation has given reason to suspect that Van Gogh's famous self-mutilation, connected with the departure of his impressionist muse, Paul Gauguin, from his life, wasn't really self-inflicted. It was believed that what actually happened was Van Gogh and Gauguin were arguing. Vincent provoked Gauguin to draw his fencing sword, and he likely accidentally struck Vincent on the ear. The main evidence of this is in correspondence. Vincent claimed that the incident had a pact of silence that came with it. Theo later wrote at another time how handy it was that Gauguin didn't have a gun. Even more suggestive was when he called Vincent a man with sealed lips. Another aspect that people seem to have the wrong impression about was that when he gave the portion of his earlobe to Rachel at the brothel, it wasn't a crazed gift. He told her, "Guard this carefully." Number 2. Lead poisoning. A big contributor to Van Gogh's numerous psychological problems was very likely his habit of ingesting the neurotoxin lead by sucking on his brushes because of the somewhat sweet aftertaste of his lead paint. Others claimed that he only did this as a means to hold on to his brushes instead of sucking them for any flavor. But either way, the point remains that he was exposed to dangerous amounts of the substance. For better or worse, poisoning from the substance was also believed to have influenced his style. The sort of luminescent look of some of Van Gogh's paintings during his later period, with halos appearing around all sorts of objects, is consistent with the effect of lead poisoning on vision. He was also known to nibble on paint chips with a particular preference for yellow and other bright colors. This must have been greatly exaggerated by a habit he developed towards the end of his life, where he would, as he wrote in a letter to Theo, pick filthy things up and eat them. Number 1. Sold more than one painting. Part of the mystique of Vincent Van Gogh as a tragically struggling and underappreciated artist is that he only sold one painting during his lifetime, or more accurately, that his very loyal and patient brother and dealer Theo did. The painting was the 1888 work The Red Vineyard in 1890, and it sold for 400 francs, which was the equivalent of about $100 at the time. But here's the thing about that. He actually was a bit more successful. It's known that he also sold at least one other painting in the UK. Of all things, it was one of Van Gogh's self-portraits that sold. You wouldn't think that a self-portrait from an obscure painter would be a very commercial product, but apparently there was something in that one painting that appealed to London art dealers named Sully and Laurie. In terms of total number of sales, Van Gogh actually was more successful with his drawings. Not enough that he was able to become self-sufficient as a painter instead of depending on his brother Theo, but it wasn't as tragic as art history would seem to make it. If anything, it should indicate to the casual fan that Van Gogh's drawings are worth just as much of a look as his paintings. So I really hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos just like this every day of the week. Also, over there on the right, a couple of other videos that you might enjoy if you enjoyed this one, and thank you for watching.